Hello, these are flipped notes 7-4, and we're talking about some different theories of emotion. My Bitmoji saying nope, 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 because she is scared. So let's talk about what happens when we have emotions like fear. What makes an emotion? There's three main parts. We have the physiological side, so our actual physical response, expressive behaviors like our facial expressions, whether or not we scream, and then our conscious experience, how we interpret it, how do we think about the emotion. We've got several theories, and our first one is the older theory from William James, as in father of American psychology, William James, and Carl Longa. So the James Longa theory proposed what basically seems kind of backwards from common sense. They said that the physiological activity precedes the emotional experience, that bodily changes are actually what cause you to feel an emotion, not whatever it is that's actually scaring you. So maybe you see a scary snake, and that causes your heart rate to go up and your lungs to increase, that you're breathing hard, and then you have the emotion. So your emotion is actually in response to your physiological response, not to the snake, but you're scared because your heart rate goes up. And you're like, oh, my heart rate is up. And that's what causes you to be afraid. So it's you feel afraid because your pulse is racing. Longa said the conscious experience of emotion results from one's perception of autonomic arousal, that we're actually more scared of our body being out of its normal state, and that's what causes fear. So this really stresses the biological determinants of behavior or of emotion. So normally we would think I tremble because I feel afraid, that you see a scary dog, causes fear, and then you have your response, your screaming and your trembling. But James Longa said, nope, it's actually the opposite. You have the autonomic arousal, your heart rate's up, and then you have the conscious feeling of fear. The next theory was called Canon Bard from Philip Bard and Walter Cannon. And they questioned the James Longa theory and noticed that sometimes people experience different emotions, but they show them the same way, like extreme happiness. You could be crying and screaming and frozen. That's, major joy. But maybe you do that same thing with fear and with anger. So why is it that we exhibit the same patterns of autonomic arousal, even though we're showing a different emotion? And they said it's because all those things are happening simultaneously. The emotion triggering stimulus and the body's arousal are happening at the same time, and you're not consciously thinking about it. So the thalamus produces both a physical response and an emotion simultaneously as it sends messages to the autonomic nervous system and the cerebral cortex at the same time. So we have a stimulus, maybe you're happy, there's a birthday cake and singing, and that causes both your heart rate to go up and you feel happy at the same time. So the main thing that we want to remember about the Canon Bard theory is that something is happening simultaneously. So we've got the brain activity, and then we have both a conscious feeling and autonomic arousal. So the way I remember this, it's going to sound funny, but I don't call this the Canon Bard theory, I call it the Canon fart theory. Because if you were going to have to fart out loud, like in class, you'd want a cannon to go off simultaneously, so that way no one would hear it. So the key thing is with that little analogy there is that the cannon is firing simultaneously with the fart. The fart is supposed to be like barred. So the emotion, the conscious feeling, and the autonomic arousal are happening simultaneously. Our third one is called the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. Usually they just call it the Schachter theory or the two-factor theory. But Stanley Schachter, who did the experiment in our previous section about overweight and normal weight people determining whether they were hungry based off of external or internal signals, it was that same Stanley Schachter. Schachter and Singer proposed a theory that our physiology and our cognitions create emotions. So the key part of this one is that your emotion has two factors, the physical arousal and that you give it a cognitive label. So there's some kind of a stimulus, maybe a thunderstorm, and you have your heart rate go up, but at the same time, you recognize that you are scared because of the thunder. And that's what creates your emotion. In this example, we've got the scary dog, the autonomic arousal, the appraisal of the situation. So that's the different part in this area, this appraisal or cognitive label, and the conscious feeling. So it says, I label my trembling as fear because I appraise the situation as dangerous. So they recognize that the situation is dangerous. The evolution theories of emotion says that we actually have a lot of emotional responses that do not have any cognitive interpretation involved, that they're just innate reactions. Remember that all of our evolutionary theories are based off of Darwin's ideas. But at this theory, the idea is that emotions have an adaptive value that increases our chances of survival. So we have these natural fears to things that were dangerous to early people. Like we're naturally scared of snakes, heights, thunderstorms, because being out in those storms was dangerous to early people. But over time, our emotions evolved before higher order thinking. Emotions evolved before higher order thinking. So those thoughts don't go with emotions. We just tend to feel those things. We may realize over time that, thunderstorms aren't really very dangerous, but your heart rate may still be going up because of that innate response. The evolutionary theories say we have fundamental emotions like fear, anger, joy, disgust, and surprise. Looking at physiological similarities and differences, our physiological responses related to fear, anger, love, and even boredom at times are very similar. And we mentioned that how, this one girl on the left could be terrified and this girl on the right could be, having the best time of her life, but that looks very much the same. And that's just because of how the body is processing those differences. Physical responses like our finger temperature can change, facial muscles change during fear, rage, and joy. The amygdala is more active during emotions like anger and rage, and different sides of the brain are more active with different emotions. So happy emotions seem to happen more on the left hemisphere, and the depressed emotions seem to happen more from the right hemisphere. Another theory, John Ledoux, says there's a reason why we experience some emotions very rapidly and some take us a little bit more time to process. And he calls these the low and high roads to fear. That we have some emotions processed very quickly, that it's just part of our autonomic response. And they're going from the thalamus, that incoming sensory stimuli, and the amygdala, which is ready and is always kind of on alert for any kind of danger. So that happens very quickly, quick and dirty, it says on here. It's the low road. But our emotions are also processed through the thalamus, and then they go up to the cortex, where more of our thinking and higher level thinking is happening and more sensory mixing, sensory associations areas are. And that takes a little bit longer. It's slow but accurate. So when you see something that's out of the norm, you might have an immediate response that gets your heart rate up. But then you give it another second and you realize, oh, that's not dangerous. That loud sound I heard that scared me, it was just a construction worker outside with a jackhammer. So I'm not in danger. But at first it sounded dangerous. So you went on alert. But then your full emotion then says, okay, this is not dangerous. We're okay. So here in red showing the autonomic response, and then the blue showing going up through the cortex. All right, that's it for this section, emotion 7-4.